Greetings, fellow painters. Today we continue our OSL hack series with a blue OSL backlight effect for the Captain miniature from the Nemesis board game. While this overall effect is similar to what you'll see in our half-chop videos, we've changed up some key steps in the process to make the final result look a little more convincing. However, if you prefer a more subtle OSL glow and don't mind spending a little extra time on the process, you can check out this video here where we apply a blue backlight glow to this Hulk miniature. But if time is of the essence and you don't mind cheating your way to object source lighting for your board game miniatures, then you're in the right place. Welcome to Trehane Miniatures. The first thing that we're changing from our half-chop videos is that we're starting from a flat black primer instead of a midnight blue paint and primer in one. Then we choose a dark but vibrant blue for the foundation for our OSL effect. Here we've chosen Rust-Oleum Ink Blue. We're going to apply this to the miniature from a single downward angle, just hitting one side of the piece. When using rattle can spray paints, it's important to depress the nozzle without the paint flow directed at the miniature. Then move the spray quickly past the model, releasing the nozzle only after the spray has completely passed the miniature. This should help minimize any speckling that can occur from a partially depressed nozzle. With the foundation for the blue backlight in place, we'll paint up the rest of the model before completing the OSL. If you're here just for the OSL tutorial, you can skip straight to that part of the video using the timestamp down below. Starting with German Camo Black Brown, I will base coat all of the Captain's clothing, face, hair, and hands. This will make a perfect foundation color for the khaki cloth, dark skin tone, and light brown hair, and will also serve as a unifying shadow color for the front of the miniature. When painting this base layer next to the blue OSL area, I overlap the blue just slightly. The brown paint is thinned just enough so that it blends into the blue area for a natural looking transition. Proceeding with the khaki clothing, I mix Necrotic Flesh by the Army Painter in with the German Camo Black Brown at about a 50-50 ratio. I dilute this a bit with water so that it is a little translucent and blends nicely with the established shadow color as I layer it over the brown. This is really a secondary shadow color, and I will cover most of the German Camo Black Brown with it. I will apply this in a couple of layers to build the opacity, covering less area with any subsequent layers. I think that the green tinge to the Necrotic Flesh makes it the perfect khaki midtone color for the clothing. I'm focusing these highlights just on the exposed raised surfaces of the clothing, and I'm not adding this to the lower rib area below the Captain's chest plate. The pants on this model have many recessed grooves that add texture to the pants. I'm not allowing any of the color to flow into those recesses, so I pull a lightly loaded brush across the surface of the pants. Layering is kind of my comfort zone, so it feels good to do this prior to the OSL hack that's coming up. It's crazy to me how different the color of this paint looks when layering it over brown compared to how it looks in the bottle. The green hue is almost imperceptible now. To highlight the clothing, I'm mixing ice yellow in with the Necrotic Flesh. These highlights are applied just to the most prominent folds and upward facing parts of the garment. I pay special attention to his upper torso around his head to draw the focus towards the Captain's face. On the arms and legs, I begin to use stippling to add a small amount of texture to the clothing. This will make it look like the light is interacting with the surface of the cloth. I use pure ice yellow for the final highlight and apply it sparingly, just to the area of clothing within the Captain's chest piece, near his face. For the Captain's face and hands, I'm going to use a mix of orange brown and German Camo Black Brown to build upon the layer of black brown that we laid down earlier. Just like when painting the clothing, this mix is a secondary shadow color that will cover most of the black brown layer. We will apply two thin layers, with the second layer covering a little less surface than the first. It's also important to note that the Captain's eyes are going to be kept in shadow. We don't want to continue layering up over his eyeballs. No painting pupils on this little model. Continuing now with a pure orange-brown layer, we're starting to think about the direction of the light source, which we want to be coming from the model's upper right. We're drawing our strokes towards this light source. Since more paint will be deposited at the end of the stroke, we want to finish our stroke at the point that will look the brightest. We're paying particular attention to the left side of the face and shaping our highlights appropriately. This side of the face is receiving less light than the right side, so we're building our highlights just on the cheek and brow, and we're not placing any orange-brown on the left side of the nose. We continue building our highlights with a mix of orange brown and ice yellow. This takes just a minute as we're highlighting a small area within the pre-established orange brown layer. mostly honing in the brightness on the right side of the face and the upward facing areas of each hand. We will also use this as a final highlight on the left cheek. The brightest highlight on the face will consist of Pure Ice Yellow by Vallejo. We're dotting this in very sparingly on the right side tip of the captain's nose, his right cheek, and his forehead around the right temple. The hair is painted extremely fast with just a few strokes of Monster Brown by the Army painter, following along the hairline framing the captain's face. We'll also pick out some of the stubble on his stash and beard. We'll follow this up with some highlights of Desert Yellow, working solely within the Monster Brown brush strokes. The final task with this miniature before wrapping up the blue OSL is to paint the metal contraption on his torso and his boots. The first step is to base coat these areas with Necromancer Cloak by the Army painter. Then for our midtone color we use Uniform Gray, which is applied to most of the surface area that is facing either upward or outward. We leave the Necromancer Cloak as the shadow color in any recesses and downward facing areas. Finally, we use Ash Gray for edge highlights, focusing mostly around the captain's upper torso and head. All of these gray components end up looking a little too blah to me, so in keeping with the blue character color theme, I decide to glaze in some Azure paint by Vallejo over the highlighted metal pieces, to include the captain's firearm. This improved the piece quite a bit in my opinion, and gave it a more steel metallic sheen rather than a boring gray chest plate look. Next, I took a minute to touch up the edge highlights with some Glacier Blue game color so that it would tie in better with the rest of the armor piece. And I'm much happier with how this looks now. Moving on to the blue OSL now, I'm choosing White Blue Pro Acryl to sketch in the highlights for this backlight effect. I know that I'm going to be covering these highlights with a very transparent fluorescent blue ink, so the light blue hue to this white will help with the following step. These highlights are applied in a much more controlled manner than the dry brush method that we normally use in our half-chop videos. In addition to the edge highlights, this method allows us to build volume on the smoother surfaces that would also reflect this blue background light. We add a second coat of this only to areas that need additional volume. This takes a little longer than dry brushing, but ultimately results in more detailed reflections. I'm also adding this white blue to the ground on both sides of the miniature. We're nearly done now, and all that's left is to glaze some blue ink over these highlights. I say glaze, but I'm using undiluted full-strength fluorescent blue ink by Daler Rowney. I'm starting at the bottom of the piece, sort of as a test. If I don't like how it looks, I have plenty of other blues that I can glaze over this. The Daler Rowney fluorescent ink is a neat looking color, but boy is it translucent. This step alone took me a full 5 minutes to apply the 2 coats needed for the final result. This may not sound like much time, but when compared to applying a single coat of Beowulf Blue speed paint in a matter of seconds, the time suck was quite noticeable. I do like the look of this better than the dry brush plus speed paint approach, so I'm not really complaining. Now that this is complete, what do you think of the cheating approach to creating OSL effects? Should I go back to the more laborious way of doing things, or should I stick with the shortcut method? Maybe a mix where I spend more time on larger, higher quality miniatures and save the OSL hacks for less deserving pieces. With that, I'd like to thank you so much for watching. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel to join our growing community of painters.